The mage fired a blazing spell into the air, the flames slamming straight into the dragon's wing. The purple dragon roared in pain. From the backline, a man shouted for Beza to activate a speed-boosting spell. Beza was an A-rank shaman affiliated with Golden Time. Next, the man ordered Lodish to keep the fire magic pouring in. Lodish was an A-rank mage, also from Golden Time. Then there was Saki. She was an S-class, third-class swordsman wielding the Savior's sword. She was told to wait for an opening and finish the fight. The one giving the commands was Kunan, an S-rank magic swordsman from Golden Time. The last person to receive instructions was Yuki. He was told to stay back and keep hidden. He was only F-rank, with no class and no affiliation. A massive backpack hung from his shoulders. Beza, Lodish, and Kunan attacked at the same time. They kept up the assault until Saki found the perfect moment. She activated a skill. It was called Luminous Slash. In the blink of an eye, the dragon was struck across multiple parts of its body. The dragon let out one final roar before crashing to the ground. Yuki watched the S-rank fighters in awe. As expected of them, they had taken down a dragon with ease. Decades had passed since the disaster known as dungeons appeared in their world, along with the adventurers who challenged them. Even so, humanity had still failed to fully clear the ever-growing number of dungeons. As a result, neglected and undiscovered dungeons frequently triggered dungeon breaks, becoming a serious social problem. Worse still, many adventurers hunted monsters only for money and refused to clear the dungeons themselves. Only a small number of heroes truly understood the danger and led parties like this one to push toward full completion. Suddenly, someone smacked Yuki's backpack. It was Beza. He called him luggage carrier and demanded a potion immediately. Yuki hurriedly rummaged through the bag. Lodish scoffed, pointing out that unlike Yuki, he was actually risking his life on the front lines. Beza added that even if Yuki was acquainted with Saki, he never expected such a small fry to tag along. They looked down on him for being the lowest rank rookie adventurer. He had almost no mana, was slow, and overall completely useless in their eyes. Kunan cut them off. Both men froze. He reminded them that they were inside a dungeon estimated to be S rank. This was not a place for idle chatter. They apologized. Then Kunan turned to Yuki. He told him to take his role seriously and do his job properly, because he was still a member of the party. Yuki replied, "Yes, sir." They continued deeper into the dungeon. Yuki agreed with Kunan's words. He realized that he still lacked the awareness expected of an adventurer. He had gotten too excited watching top-tier adventurers in action. He wanted to say that he had learned a lot. At the same time, it made him painfully aware of the massive gap between them. He didn't even have a class. Someday, he wanted to become an adventurer like them. Lost in thought, he failed to stay alert. Saki noticed and warned him that taking his eyes off the objective during an adventure was strictly forbidden. She said she didn't want to lose any more family. Yuki felt the same. He never wanted to feel that loss again. 2 years ago, he watched the news on TV as their district was destroyed by a dungeon break. Rescue operations were underway, but survival was deemed hopeless. Dungeon disasters had become an increasingly serious problem in recent years. He and Saki had grown up together in an orphanage. They admired adventurers, so they left the orphanage to chase that dream. But the home they were supposed to return to, and everyone still living in the orphanage, were all wiped out by the dungeon break. That tragedy hardened his resolve to prevent such disasters from ever happening again. What he didn't know was that someone had been watching him all along. He was the final piece in someone else's plan. A strange, unsettling presence brushed against his senses. But before he could make sense of it, a magic circle appeared beneath their feet. It was a teleportation trap. Kunan shouted for everyone to brace themselves. Those who set the trap were eagerly anticipating Yuki's arrival. They landed safely. But it was immediately clear. They had been transported straight into the boss room. Kunan reacted instantly, ordering everyone to form a circle and secure the perimeter. He also told Yuki to prepare the return item. Saki sensed something wrong. A puddle of blood on the ground began to boil, and a figure slowly emerged from it. It was a man dressed in a butler's uniform. They instinctively assumed he was the Demon King. The title Demon King was reserved only for S-class dungeon bosses, the most vile and dangerous beings of all. Yet the man before them looked almost offended by the label. Saki attacked. Kunan formed an ice javelin. He prepared to rain it down on the enemy as Saki closed the distance. At the optimal range, she unleashed Luminous Slash. The man blocked every attack effortlessly, remarking that young people these days lacked manners. He added that they were ignorant as well. More figures appeared. Maids, an elf, a beastkin, and others. Kunan was blown away. A woman with pointed elf ears attacked with magic, commenting that some unnecessary extras had tagged along with their target. All of a sudden, this monster appeared in front of Beza. The beastkin kicked Beza aside. Lodish froze in shock. Before he could react, a man wearing a magician's hat appeared behind him. Suddenly, another magic circle formed on the ground, and a calm voice remarked that this was no time for games. Someone stepped out. Everyone saw the true Demon King arrive. His presence alone exerted overwhelming pressure. Yuki was stunned by the sight before him. The Demon King released a terrifying surge of energy and fixed his gaze on Yuki. His subordinates immediately knelt. They lined up before him in absolute submission. Kunan knew it. They were moments away from being wiped out. He searched desperately for an opening, any chance at survival. The air was suffocating with tension. Yuki realized the same thing, and he refused to let it end like this. He quickly rummaged through his backpack. He knew exactly what to do. He pulled out an item and pressed the button. A magic circle appeared. He initiated the return sequence. As the countdown began at 5, he stepped forward. He deliberately drew the Demon King's attention and declared that he would be his opponent. The Demon King looked intrigued. Lotish panicked. If Yuki stepped any farther, he would be outside the return range. Saki rushed toward, but Kunan grabbed her and sprinted backward. He understood what Yuki was doing. The countdown reached 3. Kunan and Saki were now far from Yuki. Saki struggled, demanding to know what he was doing. Yuki glanced back and confirmed the distance. Everything was going according to plan. Because Kunan understood. The Beastkin lunged at Yuki. The Demon King asked him what he was plotting. The countdown hit 2. Yuki grinned and replied that it was obvious. He threw the magic item. The countdown dropped to 1. Everyone held their breath, waiting to see what would happen. Yuki declared that he would defeat the Demon King. Kunan caught the item and praised him for his magnificent decision. The countdown reached 0. The magic circle beneath the adventurers glowed brilliantly. Saki cried out Yuki's name in despair, because everyone else would be transported out, except for him. Yuki felt at peace with his decision, while Saki screamed. And just like that, they were gone. The Demon King asked if that was his way of defeating him. Yuki confidently answered yes. He had saved all those high-ranking adventurers, unlike himself. If they returned alive, they would surely conquer the dungeon someday. Still, he felt guilty for leaving Saki behind. The Demon King was impressed that Yuki had thrown away his own life for the future of humanity. He remarked that such madness was truly spectacular. Then, he offered the human a deal. Yuki hadn't expected that, and asked him to clarify. The Demon King said he had heard correctly. He wanted Yuki to join them and help conquer dungeons. Yuki was shocked. Monsters clearing dungeons? He asked why they would do such a thing. The Demon King explained that his kind was constantly exposed to danger because of human conquests. Yuki replied that humans lived under the same threat. The Demon King pointed out that if humans simply stopped entering dungeons, monsters would have no reason to go out of their way to harm them. That dungeon had been classified as S rank from the very start. It was considered deadly even during the investigation phase. To prevent further losses, the dungeon itself needed to be strengthened. And to do that, they would have to conquer other dungeon bosses and absorb their immense magical power. He could no longer allow the tragedy suffered by his subordinates to repeat. The word tragedy caught Yuki's attention. He realized that the Demon King was not so different from him. He understood that this plan would require sacrificing other dungeons. The Demon King admitted it openly. He even said they were willing to cooperate with humans if necessary. Everything he did was for the sake of his subordinates. It was only natural. Yuki understood that feeling, doing anything for family, even if it meant dying. He asked the Demon King if he could swear that once he became stronger, he would no longer kill humans, only drive them away. The Demon King replied that monsters were bound to their dungeons. If they became powerful enough that humans could no longer handle them, then humans would eventually stop coming. Yuki hesitated. Could he really trust him? The Demon King said calmly that if Yuki refused, he would simply die, and countless humans would die alongside him. Yuki knew that someday, Kunan and the others would return to conquer this dungeon. But if nothing changed, the casualties would only continue. Another tragedy would surely follow. He thought long and hard, and then he made his decision. He would help the Demon King. Without warning, the Demon King grabbed his hand. Yuki declared firmly that he wasn't doing this for the Demon King's sake. He was doing it for humanity. The Demon King was pleased with his resolve. From that moment on, Yuki became their collaborator. Yuki wondered if someone like him was truly suitable. After all, he didn't even have a class. But that was exactly why he was. Monster Tamer was a class that only the jobless could choose. They looked at him with greedy eyes, sneering that an incompetent piece of trash like him would be perfect for monsters to use. But Yuki had no intention of letting them do as they pleased. He would be the one to tame them. The Demon King explained that for them to enter other dungeons, they had to be summoned. For that to happen, they needed a collaborator who was a monster tamer. The condition to become a monster tamer was having a blank job field. The second requirement was forming a contract with a monster, which was essential. There were 3 ways to form a contract. One was to fight and defeat the monster. Another was to understand and communicate with it. Yuki asked about the third option. The Demon King revealed that the third method was force. He released a surge of energy that made Yuki scream in pain. Yuki complained that it hurt and demanded to know what he had done. He was shocked when a screen suddenly appeared. Through it, The Demon King could see everything Yuki saw. That made Yuki realize that his actions would be completely exposed. The Demon King had prepared for the possibility of betrayal, which meant Yuki couldn't ask for help. He had to do this alone. The Demon King flicked his finger, and a magic circle appeared beneath them. The preparations for the conquest were complete. It was time to send Yuki to the surface. Yuki panicked. He hadn't done anything yet. The Demon King instructed him to dive into any dungeon. At the appropriate time, he should summon him to resolve everything. Even then, Yuki still didn't understand what counted as the appropriate time. He tried to ask, but before he was already transported to the dungeon entrance where the other adventurers were gathered. Saki froze in shock, her tears stopping instantly. Yuki gave her an awkward wave. She rushed forward and hugged him tightly, crying even harder. Nearby, Beza looked at Kunan as if demanding an explanation, but Kunan could only shake his head. He had no idea either. The next day, Yuki went to the administration office to request permission to conquer a dungeon on his own. He didn't expect to run into resistance before even entering. The staff explained the situation to him. Recent dungeon activity wasn't focused on clearing sections anymore. Instead, most adventurers entered dungeons purely for money. Yuki knew that applied to nearly everyone except S ranks. That was why dungeon outbreaks were increasing, but he also knew the guild would never admit it. To prevent stagnation caused by such behavior, strict security measures and entry restrictions had been placed on all discovered dungeons. The woman showed him an infographic. She added that aside from making progress in dungeon conquests, an adventurer's contribution rating could only increase by earning the guild's trust. If he couldn't operate as part of a verified party, they couldn't confirm his contribution. Because of that, the guild couldn't tolerate actions like suddenly diving solo without forming a party. Yuki understood. If someone truly intended to clear a dungeon, there was no reason to go alone. Solo divers were usually desperate people chasing money, hoping for a lucky jackpot. He explained that he was requesting an F-rank dungeon, and that his goal was simply to level up. The woman nodded in understanding. She assigned him an F-rank dungeon, Labyrinth of Silence. There were very few monster reports, making it suitable for rookies. He was guided there, and the staff unlocked the gate. She told him to go ahead. There was an emergency button he could press if he needed assistance. Yuki remembered her saying the security was strict, but it didn't seem excessive. Still, it made sense. This was a neglected dungeon. Suddenly, the Demon King asked what a neglected dungeon was. Yuki nearly jumped. He hadn't expected the voice to speak directly in his head. He asked if that was the Demon King's skill. The Demon King replied that it was actually Yuki's skill. Communication with monsters was basic for a monster tamer. Yuki didn't know that. It was his first time using a skill. It was a passive skill, convenient, but unsettling. As he descended the dungeon staircase, Yuki explained that a neglected dungeon was one lacking management, maintenance, and conquest. There were simply too many dungeons for proper response. If a dungeon was rich in resources, adventurers would flock to it for profit, and proper measures would be enforced. The Demon King summarized it simply. The dungeon had been abandoned by humans. He expected the monsters inside to be breeding peacefully. Yuki added that if monster reproduction exceeded a dungeon's limits, it could collapse. He noticed there were very few monsters inside. But even for a weak dungeon, something felt off. Suddenly, the ground trembled. As someone screamed at him to run, a man and a woman burst past him, fleeing in terror from the dungeon boss. Yuki stared in shock at the massive slime behind them. The Demon King immediately understood. With too few humans entering the dungeon, the monsters had resorted to cannibalism. That was why there were so few monsters left, and why that thing had grown so enormous. Yuki guided them toward an alleyway, but the slime was rapidly catching up to them. Even when they were close, the woman began to lose hope. Her strength was failing. She stumbled, and was caught. Her body was swallowed, trapped inside the slime. Yuki asked Demon King Liber if he could save her once he was summoned. Liber replied that it was impossible. The aftershock of the summoning alone would blow the slime apart, along with everything else inside it. That was no good. The woman looked like she was drowning within the slime. Yuki suddenly had an idea. He jumped straight into the slime. The Demon King was amused. Just as he expected, even at the cost of his own body, Yuki would do anything to save someone. He swam through the viscous mass toward the woman. Once he reached her and grabbed hold, he knew it was time to summon Demon King Liber. A violent surge of energy erupted, and Liber's hands began to manifest. Liber allowed him to use his power. In the middle of the summoning, Yuki coughed up blood. It felt as if his body was being burned from the inside out. A holographic image of Liber appeared behind him and told him not to break. Liber tried to cross the magic circle. He tested it with a finger. He couldn't help but be surprised. This was all Yuki could muster even at full power. It was weak, but still sufficient for an enemy of this level. Power gathered at the tips of his fingers. Then, Yuki cast Chaotic Dawn. A devastating beam struck the enemy and caused a massive explosion. Yuki realized just how terrifying that power was. It was nothing short of a disaster. Everything in front of them was wiped out. The woman regained consciousness and trembled, saying it was terrifying. The man noticed Yuki's injuries. Blood was flowing from Yuki's eyes and mouth. The man urged him to hurry outside, saying he looked critically injured. Only then did Yuki realize how bad his condition was. His vision blurred. and he collapsed face first onto the ground. A few days later, inside the Endless Abyss dungeon, Yuki told Lieber that his first rank up had happened while he was unconscious. He had received the notification in the hospital. He mentioned that he had scared the two adventurers, yet they still carried him out and reported everything properly. Lieber asked why he looked so downcast and invited him to have a toast instead. Yuki didn't understand why. All he had done was summon him. He felt disappointed when he realized that summoning was the only thing he could contribute. Lieber pointed out that Yuki hadn't abandoned the life in front of him at that moment. Instead, he had seized a different possibility without hesitation. Lieber said he liked that strength and offered him a wine glass. Yuki accepted it and thanked him for the praise. Lieber admitted that it troubled him how Yuki nearly died every time he summoned him, so he introduced someone Yuki could summon next time. Her name was Elvina, an undead maid. Yuki noticed how calm and composed she was. She joked that falling in love with her at first sight would be troublesome. After all, she had no pulse. Her undead joke didn't land very well. Yuki worried if she would be all right. Lieber reassured him that she was stronger than he was. Elvina said she wanted to be a relatable and approachable maid. They decided to focus on raising Yuki's level first. He needed to grow strong enough to withstand summoning Lieber properly. Soon, several burning creatures approached them. Elvina simply punched them. Every threat was eliminated instantly. Yuki realized just how strong she was. They were inside an E-rank dungeon, the Den of the Burning Ones. Elvina ran circles around him, proudly declaring that she was a capable maid. Yuki was reminded of a child from the orphanage who used to seek attention in the same way. She always played with him. The nostalgia didn't last long. A flood of level-up notifications appeared, nearly driving him insane. Elvina was surprised that he found leveling up annoying. She wondered if that was some kind of living joke. They reached a darker section of the dungeon. Yuki noticed that he could maintain Elvina's summon far longer than Lieber's. She explained that Lieber was simply too special. The mana required to summon him was so immense that the summoning was likely interrupted halfway through. Yuki knew that was true. He had only managed to summon Lieber's fingertips. Elvina concluded that, by comparison, she was a bargain. Someone Yuki's mana could easily sustain. Yuki replied that she was reliable. That made her blush. Yuki realized that summoning wasn't just about raw power. Efficiency mattered too. They came upon a sealed door. Yuki wondered how they were supposed to get inside. Elvina stretched her arms. She punched it. The door shattered. She casually remarked that she had only been knocking. A warrior stood waiting on the other side. Elvina charged forward. The warrior wielded a flaming sword. But Yuki noticed something strange about the flame. He threw a dagger. It deflected the blade just before it could strike Elvina. Still, a trace of flame brushed her cheek, causing cracks to spread across her skin. Yuki asked if she was all right. She asked him when he had noticed the holy attribute flames. He answered that they simply looked different from the fire throughout the dungeon. They resembled the light Saki used. Elvina explained that holy flames were the natural enemy of the undead. She joked that it made her heart race, even though her heart had already stopped. Yuki told her this wasn't the time for jokes, and urged her to retreat. But the warrior activated a fire circle sanctuary. Elvina realized that the dungeon boss was similar to Lieber. It wouldn't allow them to escape. Yuki considered summoning Lieber, but Elvina stopped him. With his current strength, he could only summon her. They had no choice but to face it together. Elvina remarked that it was a cruel joke, a monster tamer standing on the front lines instead of his monsters. But that was exactly Yuki's plan. They were comrades. Her lips curved into a smile. Now she was fully committed to fighting alongside him. Yuki would show the dungeon boss the results of their growth. And if it came down to it, she would protect him. Elvina and Yuki prepared themselves to face the dungeon boss. Yuki had expected to gain a new skill after leveling up. He obtained Eye of Truth. Through it, he could read the enemy's abilities. It described holy fire as a flame that exerted absolute effectiveness against dark attribute beings. Elvina asked what was wrong. When Yuki looked at her, her skill appeared, Made of All Wind. It increased all parameters for a limited duration. At the same time, the system warned him of an incoming attack from the dungeon boss. Fire spiraled toward them. Yuki grabbed Elvina and pulled her out of the way. He told her that he could now see monster attributes and skills, along with their danger levels. She replied that this was one of the basic abilities of a monster tamer, eyes that reveal the truth of monsters. He still couldn't see everything, but it was a good start. They braced themselves for the next attack. Elvina moved swiftly, dodging the flames. She charged straight at the dungeon boss. Now she could attack with confidence. She kicked it. There was no reaction. Yuki was stunned. Elvina realized that her attack hadn't dealt any damage. Yuki explained that he had just discovered the dungeon boss was actually a fire monster. Elvina was dumbfounded. It seemed obvious at first glance. He clarified that small, amorphous fire monsters were moving inside the armor, shifting constantly to evade attacks. That was why her kicks weren't landing. She wasn't hitting their true bodies. Yuki could see the letters and indicators slowly shifting. Their strategy was decided. Elvina teased him, telling him not to be captivated by her performance this time. He warned her that the boss was winding up an attack. She needed to jump, now. Yuki began issuing commands. Duck. Pull back to the right. The next strike was coming from below, then target the left arm, the right shoulder, and, finally, the head. The dungeon boss staggered, visibly disoriented. Yuki told her to fall back for the moment. It was the first time the boss showed a clear reaction, but even then, it barely managed to dodge. He instructed her to evade to the right. Suddenly, Yuki was caught off guard and struck. Fortunately, Elvina rushed in and saved him, reminding him to look out for his own safety as well. Once they reached a safe distance, Yuki apologized. Elvina then suggested that he use her skill. He checked its description. She explained that a monster tamer could forcibly activate a contracted monster's skill. That skill would boost her stats for only a brief instant. Yuki realized that if he used it, they would have to finish the fight before the enemy could react. It could only be activated once, meaning the timing had to be perfect. Elvina acted cute and said she trusted him to use it properly. Yuki resolved to end the battle with the next exchange. A series of danger warnings flashed before his eyes. He warned her of an incoming combo attack and told her to dodge to the right. After that, she had to remain exactly where she was. Then slide left. A blast of flame surged toward Yuki. He was struck and knocked to the ground, but he forced himself back up and told her not to worry about him. He ordered her to leap left. Then he activated Maid of All Wind. Elvina's kick exploded with power, slamming the dungeon boss into the ground and carving a deep dent into it. The battle ended. Yuki finally relaxed, relieved that they had won. Elvina said softly that the skill had taken a lot out of her. With those words, she bid him farewell. Yuki was stunned. She disappeared before he could even stand. He tried to summon her again, but there was no response. Eventually, he returned to the heart of Liber's dungeon. Liber was relieved to see him alive. He asked where Elvina was. He said he needed to speak with her so he wouldn't leave her behind on the next adventure. Liber guided him onward. If Yuki had arrived any later, he wouldn't have been able to see her face. Yuki froze when he saw her resting inside a coffin. Confused, he asked what this meant. Liber explained that this was how they mourned their dead. He asked if it was different from how humans did it. Yuki couldn't understand what he was hearing. So Liber explained further. Elvina was an undead maid. The skills of her race produced immense power at the cost of destroying their own bodies. Yuki remembered that the skill had a usage limit of 1. Now he understood what that truly meant. He couldn't accept it. He never wanted her to die. He only wanted to defeat the enemy. Liber stated calmly that, for the sake of protecting the dungeon, her life had been a worthy price. He believed she had fulfilled her duty to the utmost. He admitted that the responsibility ultimately lay with him, the Demon King. But Yuki couldn't accept that answer. He blamed himself for not thinking carefully and for blindly following her suggestions, and for being too weak to fight properly on his own. Once again, he regretted his weakness. Yuki broke down in tears. Liber told him that he intended to make Yuki stronger. Yuki asked if there was anything he could do, any skill that could bring her back. Liber replied that there was none. A monster tamer used monsters. They consumed them. They did not repair them. Yuki refused to accept that. Then someone arrived and told Liber not to be so cruel. It was May. She said that a conclusion had already been reached regarding this matter. But the boy had not been included in that decision, so it wasn't truly settled. Yuki recognized her as one of the executives and activated Eye of Truth. She introduced herself politely as he read her information. She possessed both holy and demonic attributes, the skill made in order, and resurrection from corpse. His breath caught. She smiled and asked him if he wanted to know how to bring Elvina back. Yuki felt a surge of hope when he heard that Elvina could be brought back to life. He knew that with May's skill, it was possible. May was surprised that he could see her skills. Because of that, there wasn't much need for explanation. Yuki clarified that all he could see were the skill's effects and the fact that there were conditions attached. That made sense. He had only just awakened the skill, so it was natural that his understanding was limited. He asked May to explain it properly. May formally introduced herself. She was responsible for overseeing everyone within the dungeon, managing affairs, caring for its inhabitants, and providing backup. The word backup caught Yuki's attention, so she elaborated. Since humans constantly invaded the dungeon to kill them, she existed as insurance. Even if someone died, she could resurrect them and prevent the dungeon from collapsing. The moment Yuki heard that, he demanded that she resurrect Elvina immediately. May calmly reminded him that there were conditions. First, the skill consumed an enormous amount of magic. It was extremely inefficient. For example, if she killed Yuki and then resurrected him, the cost would equal the magic required to construct an entire dungeon floor. For a human, that alone was already excessive. For Elvina, it would require even more. She explained that using the skill would cause the dungeon to shrink drastically. Yuki understood immediately. A smaller dungeon would be far easier for humans to conquer. She confirmed it and added that even the executive Shion strongly opposed it. Shrinking the dungeon would only lead to more deaths. Yuki suggested slowly accumulating unused magic over time. Given enough time, they might gather enough for a single resurrection. But that wouldn't work either. The second condition required the individual's own remaining magic. Elvina's magic still existed, but it would completely dissipate within 10 days at most. That was why they needed to urgently acquire magic from another source. May confirmed his conclusion. That was the reason they had sent him to conquer a slightly larger dungeon. Now Yuki finally understood the true purpose of conquering dungeons. By stealing magic from other dungeons, May's resurrection skill could be used without restriction. That was certainly one of their objectives. However, the dungeons Yuki had encountered so far were nowhere near sufficient. Yuki asked how much magic was actually needed if even an F-rank or E-rank dungeon required so much. May admitted she didn't understand human ranking systems, but she shared that when she proposed targeting a truly large dungeon, everyone else dismissed it as suicide. They couldn't risk exposing the core of their crucial plan, the very thing Elvina had sacrificed her life to protect, to mortal danger again. Yuki volunteered. Lieber immediately called it reckless. He asked if Yuki had any plan at all, since both Yuki and any new monsters would likely end up just like Elvina. Yuki admitted that he hadn't figured out how to conquer it or grow stronger yet. But if this was the only viable path, he had no choice, no matter what. He knew that was the reason Lieber had made a contract with him in the first place. Lieber accepted that answer. He was about to refuse when someone cleared their throat. The butler stepped forward and volunteered to train Yuki. Yuki recognized him immediately. It was the man Saki had fought. May was pleased to see Viento support the plan. Viento reasoned that with Yuki's current strength, danger and sacrifice were inevitable, no matter where he went. Lieber understood. He entrusted Yuki to Viento for the next 7 days. He ordered Yuki to follow him. Yuki placed his trust in him as well. May remarked that she could finally relax since Viento was exceptionally strong, but Lieber insisted that she accompany them immediately. Considering that Viento had opposed using humans until the very end, there was a real chance he might simply kill Yuki. May acknowledged that it was a valid concern. Viento and Yuki stepped into a magic circle. When Yuki opened his eyes, he was shocked to realize they were still inside the dungeon. Viento explained that this was another facet of the Demon King's power. Each executive was granted a personal dungeon floor to use. Yuki was the first human ever to see an executive's floor. Viento told him to consider it an honor. Seeing the scale of the dungeon and the number of floors it possessed, Yuki realized just how much of a last resort resurrection truly was. He asked Viento whether his training would help him level up. Viento explained that for humans, leveling up meant eroding the magic of others, monsters or entire dungeons, and assimilating it into themselves. In other words, adventurers damaged dungeons simply by fighting within them. They took the magic for themselves. Yuki had formed a contract with the Demon King. Although the executives had different vessels, they all shared the magic of Lieber's dungeon. Because of that, conventional leveling was impossible. Yuki realized that this was another reason Lieber had sent him to other dungeons, despite the risks. He asked Viento how he planned to train him. Viento threw a sword at him. Yuki caught it instinctively and understood. He intended to arm him properly. Viento said there were countless things to teach him, starting with the fact that Yuki had no foundation whatsoever. He wanted Yuki to turn the techniques he learned into real strength, because Yuki lacked power, he lacked knowledge, and he lacked talent. Yuki barely had time to process that before Viento attacked him. Viento told him that if he wanted to reclaim Elvina, he first had to build a foundation. Strength, technique, knowledge, talent. Everything. Viento moved so fast that Yuki doubted he could even keep up. Viento told him that if Yuki failed, then the fate of everything would have to be entrusted to someone else of that caliber. Yuki sensed killing intent, then realized it wasn't quite that. Viento clarified that he wouldn't make such a judgment lightly, for the sake of the dungeon and Lord Lieber. Yuki understood then. To Viento, someone like him dying wouldn't matter. Viento gave him one condition: survive for 3 hours. To truly make a sword your own, nothing surpassed standing at the brink of death. Their blades collided. Yuki vowed to endure hell itself and bring her back to life. Yuki activated his Demon Eye of Truth, revealing Viento's skill, Blood Petal Blade. Every single strike was lethal. The gap between them was so vast that Yuki couldn't even see a way out. If he couldn't block the attack, then he had no choice but to move somewhere he couldn't even see the danger coming from. Viento asked if that was really the only skill Yuki could use. Then he attacked again. The blade grazed Yuki's face, leaving a shallow cut. Viento continued his assault, but Yuki managed to evade every strike. Viento noticed it immediately and acknowledged that Yuki was at least capable of dodging. However, Yuki's movements were full of unnecessary motion. That was exactly why, Viento pointed out. Yuki's counterattacks were being shut down so easily. Yuki was completely overwhelmed. Viento could tell that he couldn't even buy himself a moment to breathe. Worse still, his judgment was slow. If he only thought about his next move after being blocked, it was no different from asking to be killed. Viento leapt down with his blade and struck hard. Yuki barely managed to block in time, sparks exploding on impact as he realized just how dangerous the blow had been. Yuki tried to think of his next move. He swung his weapon and pressed the attack. Viento calmly blocked it, stopping the strike with minimal effort. He told Yuki that forcing an offense wouldn't change anything. Then, Viento blasted him away with a single strike. Drops of blood splattered across the floor. Still, Yuki had managed to cut a small portion of Viento's hair tie. Viento noticed it. Yuki's movements had improved. Yuki said that he could see Viento's movements, the way he swung his sword, and the most efficient way to block it. So it wasn't just about stats. With his eyes, Yuki could understand how a monster moved its body. Viento was impressed that Yuki wasn't just staring blindly, but it still wasn't enough. To begin with, their physiques were different. Their sword skills were different. And above all, their experience was worlds apart. Yuki knew he was in a terrible situation. His arms and legs were battered. Danger markers filled his vision. And Viento still hadn't used any mana. This was nothing but pure swordsmanship. Yuki still hoped that he could catch up. Viento found it impressive that Yuki retained such an unyielding spirit after all that. He wondered whether it was simple recklessness or something more. So he decided to test it. He released an ominous power. Danger markers flooded Yuki's vision all at once. He couldn't see anything. If this continued, he would die. If he couldn't see through it, there was no future for him. Yuki decided that he no longer needed danger information. What he needed most was information about Viento's skill. He had to change his perspective. He was as good as dead anyway. He didn't want information that only helped him survive. Viento transformed blood into blades, unleashing repeated slashes toward his target. Yuki focused on that. Their attacks collided, releasing a violent surge of energy. The shockwave blasted rocks and debris in every direction. Viento was left speechless. A shallow cut had appeared on his cheek. He looked down at Yuki, who lay unconscious on the ground. By the end of the battle, Yuki's body was covered in slashes. Sometime later, Yuki jolted awake. Viento was waiting for him at the foot of the bed. He told Yuki to follow him at once. Yuki was slightly disoriented. He remembered taking Viento's skill during the fight. He asked what had happened to his wounds. Viento replied that Mei had healed them. Since Yuki hadn't died, it hadn't required much mana. Deep down, Viento hadn't expected Yuki to attempt stealing his technique at such a critical moment. That only made him more curious about what lay ahead for him. Regardless, his real training would now begin. First, they entered a room filled with monsters. Naturally, Yuki was startled. The number of enemies was high, but Viento believed he could handle it easily. Yuki unsheathed his sword. He was starting to get used to the idea of death. The next thing we knew was that Yuki was confused. He couldn't understand why he had been assigned to serve tea to monsters. On top of that, he was dressed in a butler's uniform. Viento explained that a top-tier swordsman allowed no wasted movement in their conduct. Posture, footwork, and even the smallest gestures had to be perfectly optimized. That was why Yuki had to learn to strip away everything unnecessary. A butler's work tolerated no lapses, no hesitation, not even the slightest tremor in the fingertips. One had to learn how to command the entire body. At the same time, one also had to learn how to properly use their eye. Skills evolved depending on how they were used. Monsters of various races had gathered for the tea party. Yuki had to read each of them precisely, understanding what they desired. Yuki began by watching and memorizing every single movement Viento made. He observed how Viento poured tea and carried out his duties. No matter what he did, Viento remained calm and elegant, even when carrying a stack of plates. When Yuki tried the same thing, his hands trembled. He even dropped a plate, shattering it on the floor. That was when he realized something important. Watching and learning wasn't enough. Actually performing the actions with his own body was far more difficult. He couldn't believe how poorly he mimicked Viento. It was something he had never noticed during battle. That realization led him to understand that simple imitation wouldn't work. He needed to add his own interpretation. He began pondering how to truly command his entire body. The next day, he served an intimidating monster. The creature showed interest in Yuki because he was the human Viento often spoke with, which meant he must be strong. Yuki clarified that he was still in the process of becoming stronger. The monster volunteered to whip him into shape and struck him. Because Yuki was short on stamina, he activated his eye. Using it, he tracked Viento's movements and the monsters around him. He tested his timing. And a punch landed cleanly on the monster's jaw. On the fourth day, he served a lizard-like monster. Using his eye, he noticed that it was cold. He observed, predicted, and moved accordingly. He placed a blanket over the lizard-like monster. It immediately became fond of him. The monsters there were incredibly diverse, nothing like humans at all. Slowly, Yuki began to understand why Viento had chosen this kind of training. On the sixth day, his guest was a small, cute bat. It was hungry. Yuki served it confidently, only to realize that it wanted his blood. The bat's skill was blood suck, allowing it to consume blood as a substitute for food. On the seventh day, Yuki demonstrated his tea-serving skills to Viento himself. He asked how he did. Viento deducted points for taste and language, but his conduct passed. For days now, Yuki had been doing nothing but fighting and attending tea parties, and somehow he had endured it all. At the very end, something finally clicked. But Viento corrected him. He said Yuki was only just reaching the final stage. That stage was a battle with him. Viento activated Blood Petal Blade. Yuki immediately unsheathed his sword. Viento was impressed. Yuki could now activate his eye instantaneously. He had once mimicked the skill unconsciously, but now imitation was no longer enough. If Yuki didn't make it his own, he would die. Yuki didn't need to be told that. Death was a natural outcome. He activated his eye, and the description of Blood Petal Blade appeared. The skill transformed stored blood into blades, unleashing repeated slashes upon the target. Normal defense was impossible. It could only be neutralized by an attack of the same type. This time, Yuki could see it in far greater detail. And now, he knew how to use his body as well. He activated the same skill, Blood Petal Blade, and their swords clashed. But to his shock, Yuki's sword shattered. A slash opened across his abdomen, and blood poured out. Viento was disappointed. He wondered if Yuki had fallen just one step short. Blood pooled on the floor. Yuki felt regret. He still hadn't saved Elvina. He warned Viento not to place limits on him. Otherwise, they were going to have a problem. He used the blood on the floor and activated his own version of Blood Petal Blade. It transformed stored blood into countless fine blades, unleashing a storm of slashes. Normal defense was impossible. It could only be neutralized by an attack of the same type. Viento was stunned. Yuki had reinvented the skill. Yuki refused to give up after failing once. Instead, he chose to win through sheer volume, raining blood-forged swords down upon Viento. Then he struck with his blade. Viento blocked it. He was genuinely impressed. Yuki asked for his opinion. Viento replied that Yuki wouldn't be able to use that skill in rapid succession. Yuki staggered. He had reached his limit. Viento caught him before he fell. Neither of them noticed that Yuki's phone slipped from his pocket. As Viento supported him while walking, he told Yuki that he still had much more to teach him. A message arrived. Saki informed him that she had found the dungeon exploration request he had asked about. She was worried for him. Even as a joint mission, it was still a B-rank dungeon, and the boss inside was unknown. Yuki informed Lieber that he would be entering a B-rank dungeon. Lieber could tell that Yuki had already gained a considerable amount of power. Viento commented that even though Yuki's manners were still a little rough, his swordsmanship had become noticeably more refined. Lieber was curious whether an E-rank like Yuki could really enter a B-rank dungeon. Yuki clarified that he wasn't clearing it. He was going along as a research assistant, the same arrangement as when they first met him. That was when they realized he intended to clear the dungeon if the opportunity presented itself. They asked who he planned to contract with. They were all surprised by his choice. After that, Yuki headed to the Adventurers Guild. Saki greeted him cheerfully. Noticing the sword at his waist, she grew curious and asked whether he had recently learned how to use one. Yuki apologized for making such an unreasonable request this time. However, Saki didn't mind at all. She often received very specific requests like this. If anything, having someone she knew along made things easier for her. Suddenly, a man called out to Saki. He was accompanied by two others. They urged her to hurry up so they could head to the dungeon. When they noticed Yuki, they asked who he was. Yuki quietly asked Saki whether they were party members. She shook her head. She explained that they weren't collaborators she had invited. Instead, they were volunteers who had picked up the request from the guild. Their goal was simple: rank up efficiently by taking low-risk requests while tagging along with an S rank like her. Since Yuki was with Saki, they assumed he was A rank. When Saki told them he was E rank, one of them asked if that was a problem. The man laughed, finding it amusing that Yuki was ranked lower than them. He went on to say that an E rank would only be a burden. Claiming they were doing Saki a favor, he told her to ditch that loser and take proper B rank members instead. Saki ignored him and mentioned that Yuki had cleared 2 dungeons alone. Yuki gave a vague reply, saying it was something like that. The men didn't believe it. An E-rank clearing dungeon solo was unheard of. Normally, adventurers ranked up through investigations or delivery requests. Unless someone was aiming for A rank or higher, dungeon clearing wasn't even attempted. The leader of the group grew irritated. His original plan was to manipulate Saki into clearing dungeons so he could ride her success straight to A rank. If someone had actually cleared dungeons alone, it would ruin his chances of standing out. He pressed the issue again, but Saki had had enough. She firmly stated that he was hired to assist with an investigation, not a clear. She then explained their current target. The dungeon was estimated to be B rank, known as the Cave of Cloistered Desire. Dungeon ranks were determined by the boss. Yuki asked how they could estimate the boss's threat level without seeing it. Saki explained that it was based on dungeon complexity. The stronger the boss, the larger and more intricate the first floor would be. Stronger bosses also meant more floors leading up to them. In short, the rank was determined by the size of the first floor and the number of floors. According to records, the dungeon was small in scale with narrow paths. With 22 floors, it was classified as B rank. However, no matter which room they searched, they couldn't find the boss. Eventually, the investigation request had been passed to Saki, though she admitted she wasn't particularly good at this type of work. Suddenly, a massive worm-like monster emerged. The blonde-haired man pointed it out to their leader. That obnoxious leader immediately shouted at them not to interfere. It was his prey. He cleaved the creature in half with his axe. Grabbing one half of the corpse, he boasted to Saki that he had taken it down flawlessly. Saki felt conflicted. Subduing monsters wasn't part of the investigation request. Yuki could tell that being an S rank came with its own difficulties. That same man, Gaido, turned to Yuki and mocked him, demanding that the E rank do something for once. As he kept yapping, the wall behind him suddenly collapsed. A massive rock-like monster emerged. It was a golem. Saki and Yuki moved at the same time. She activated Luminous Slash. Gaito froze. He hadn't even seen her move. Saki told them that she didn't need combat support. She only wanted them to focus on investigating and staying alive. Then, Yuki apologized. He carefully struck the golem, making sure not to get in her way. Saki asked if he had timed his attack with hers. Yuki replied that he had. It looked sturdy. She was stunned. Even if it was just once, the fact that he could keep up was impressive, especially considering he had only recently started learning the sword. Her face flushed slightly. It was far more than she had expected. Now she understood why the fight had been so smooth. She smiled brightly, thanked him for his help, and praised him for doing well. Since the golem had emerged directly from the wall, Yuki couldn't help thinking that dungeons truly made no sense. Saki told him to leave combat to her while they focused on investigating. Gaito looked displeased. With things turning out this way, he became even more determined to find the boss room and make a contribution. But after 10 hours, they still hadn't found a single trace of it. The three men were exhausted. Saki searched around again, but there seemed to be nowhere left to go to reach the next floor. They had already checked for hidden branches. Yuki placed his hand against the wall, curious about what lay beyond it. Gaito scoffed at him, lecturing him about dungeon mechanics. A dungeon was an isolated magical dimension, he explained. It only looked like part of their world. Even if it resembled a cave, it wasn't one. Gaito suddenly lunged forward, driving his knee toward Yuki. Yuki stood frozen, barely reacting as the attack closed in. Gaito warned him that trying to dig through dungeon walls would only result in hitting a layer of mana and injuring himself. Yuki calmly replied that it didn't look that way to him. Gaito was confused. Using his special eye, Yuki revealed that the entire cave was made of the same material as the golems they had been fighting. Understanding dawned on Saki. She told everyone to step back and unleashed Luminous Slash. A hole opened in the wall and she ordered them inside. The moment they entered, they were greeted by a massive golem. The tension was palpable, especially for Gaito. Saki realized the truth. They weren't inside a dungeon. They were inside a golem that had been masquerading as one. Gaito asked what the point of that was. The answer was obvious: to fake its rank. Yuki asked whether this meant they had just reached the real first floor. The sheer scale of the space gave him a clue. It felt like stepping outdoors. Saki initially thought it was A rank. Then she corrected herself. It was on the verge of becoming S rank. They reviewed the intel first. Only then did they confirm the truth. This wasn't a B rank dungeon, but an A rank super large dungeon. The desert floor itself was made of golems, camouflaged as the dungeon. Yuki and Saki focused their attention on something in the distance. A floating castle. Gaito noticed that the massive golem beneath them had stopped moving. Saki explained that it had likely shut down to conserve mana after failing its objective. He didn't understand what she meant, so Saki elaborated. The dungeon had probably been designed to prevent an S-rank conquest, someone like her. That realization made her wary. Gaito was stunned. He had always believed monsters were nothing more than glorified animals. Saki corrected him. Dungeons weren't merely resource generators. Originally, they were front lines, built to repel enemies that threatened human society. Yuki already knew this. He was aware that monsters possessed intelligence, strategy, and, in some cases, even emotions. Saki treated the situation as a blessing in disguise. They had discovered it before it could fully evolve into an S-rank threat. She decided to strike before it went into hiding. With that, she declared the investigation complete. The conquest would begin. She told the others to head back while they still could and report to the guild. Fortunately, since this was still the first floor, the gate was right there. But Yuki couldn't afford to leave. He said he wanted to stay. Saki looked at him and asked if he was sure. Seeing her calm expression, Yuki asked whether she truly wanted him to come along. She replied that she needed someone who could carry the boss's intel back if things went wrong, and among everyone present, he was the best choice. She grabbed him by the collar, looked straight into his eyes, and said that both of them were going home together. Yuki agreed. More than anything, he didn't want anyone else to die. With that, Saki lifted him, princess style, and took off. She activated Luminous Formula and dashed forward. In an instant, Gaito could no longer see them. Still, he refused to simply go home. A fragment of yellow crystal fell to the ground. As Saki sped toward the floating castle, they took the shortest route possible, by breaking through the floors. The mana grew so dense that it felt like they had reached the dungeon's deepest layer. Suddenly, a voice echoed. It expressed surprise that humans had managed to reach this place on their own. A red, crystallized figure flipped through the air, glowing brilliantly. Its sharp, gem-like body spun as it descended. They had met the dungeon boss, a jewel golem, Carrot. She aimed to become the most beautiful and effortless demon lord. Saki realized that Carrot had been secretly accumulating mana for that purpose. She confirmed her suspicion. Little by little, Carrot had been polishing her beauty. Without warning, Carrot activated Carrot Critical Cutter and targeted Yuki. At the same time, Yuki activated the Demon Eye of Truth. He dodged her rapid, continuous attacks. That alone impressed Carrot. Normally, the fight would have ended right there. Her movements were blindingly fast. A single hit would have been fatal. But compared to Viento, she felt almost motionless. Yuki wasn't afraid. He countered her attacks with his sword. Karat mocked him, saying it was useless. Her body was far harder than the golems they had fought earlier. Yuki already knew that. His goal wasn't to damage her, it was to create an opening. And in that moment, Saki unleashed Luminous Slash. Carrot recoiled in shock. They had scratched her. Saki acknowledged that Carrot was durable, but not unbreakable. She blasted her into the wall. Yuki couldn't help thinking how absurd S-rank skills truly were. Carrot complained that it hurt. Saki noticed something unsettling. The monster hadn't lost her composure. That meant there was more. She warned Yuki not to lower his guard. He nodded and asked what was coming next. Saki pressed the attack, chaining strikes together to wear Carrot down. Then Karat spoke. She said she had seen it, their weakness. She activated Carrot Creation. Colossal. An enormous amount of mana was consumed, yet nothing seemed to happen. Suddenly, Saki's face turned pale. The golems outside, where Gaido and the others were, had regenerated. The path to the gate was sealed. Carrot informed them calmly that if they didn't save those men, they would die. Saki realized the truth. Carrot had gathered materials from the golems themselves. The situation had turned dire. If they wasted time defeating Carrot, the others would die. But she also couldn't afford to look away from the boss. Yuki told her to go. They couldn't leave Carrot unattended, so he said it plainly. He would defeat her. Saki entrusted everything to him. Before she dashed away, she smiled and told him that they would celebrate together when they returned. Carrot laughed. She found it amusing that someone who couldn't even scratch her was staying behind. To her, he was nothing more than a sacrificial pawn, but Yuki corrected her. This wasn't sacrifice, it was trust. Saki, Liber, even Viento, they believed in him. That belief was the reason he stood there now, and that was why. He would answer it. Carrot stiffened when she felt his mana surge. She couldn't understand why a human possessed the power of a monster. Yuki declared that from this moment on, he would fight as a monster. Tamer. He warned her to prepare herself for a sword technique belonging to a monster far stronger than her. Karat was genuinely shocked when Yuki's blade cut into her. He had completely seen through her skill. By reading her movements and power flow, he wasted nothing. Every motion was precise. She immediately switched techniques, activating Carrot Cure Cut. She was confident with the shape that there was no way he could parry it. She would annihilate him. Yuki challenged her, daring to see if his sword could still reach her. He looked confident, but she sensed a gap and instantly used Slash. He used her own hardness against her. It completely caught her off guard. Yuki struck. Crystals scattered from her body. She couldn't believe it. He had damaged her from the very start. Only now did she truly understand the strength of a monster tamer. The fact that he dared to damage her shell enraged her. There was no way she would forgive such an insignificant human. Yuki knew this wouldn't end there. She released more power, finally revealing her true skill. Her class curse, activated. Carrot skill, change. She polished, compressed, decorated. Her body transformed into the hardest, sharpest, and most beautiful golem imaginable, the true power of a master dungeon. Humans were sealed inside crystals where she extracted mana. She planned to grind him down until he was nothing more than a grain of sand. He wouldn't even earn a place in her collection. Carrot's massive, hammer-like arm slammed down toward Yuki. Her confidence grew. There was no way he could kill her now. Yuki mocked her obsession with making herself and her subordinates massive, calling it unoriginal. She replied coldly that gems are more valuable the larger they are. Yuki countered that skill was what truly mattered, and how beautifully the gems were cut. He activated the blood petal blade. Carrot froze when she saw it. She couldn't understand how a human possessed a skill so similar to a monster's. He told her it was his own style. Swords bloomed around her, closing in from every direction. Her barrier shattered. The blades slashed relentlessly from all sides. Blood sprayed as her body was carved apart. Yuki finally relaxed. He had gambled on the move, and it paid off. Blood dripped from his sword. He could feel its weight. With his back turned, Yuki didn't realize that Carrot was still conscious. She couldn't believe Dronzer saw her Psychicon sacrifice most of her body as disposable material. It was an absurdly powerful skill, but the cost was enormous. She launched a sneak attack, but Yuki deflected it instantly. He warned her again. He could see through her movements. Still, she noticed something important. He was nearing his limit. Once more, Yuki used the blood petal blade, again in his own style. She was confused. Why do it again when his body could barely move? Yuki admitted it himself, he couldn't move anymore, so he summoned help. A small, adorable bat appeared. It smiled at him. Earlier, inside Lieber's dungeon, they had already understood why Yuki chose that monster. His plan was simple: use the blood he had stored. The bat's skill was vampirism, allowing it to absorb blood and convert it into sustenance. It was a skill that required massive amounts of blood. If both attempts failed, Yuki would be in mortal danger. Yuki could only contract one monster. That meant the second strike had to land. The first attack used his own blood. Viento was deeply worried. Yuki would be left on the brink of death. But that was exactly the point, using weakness to bait the enemy into lowering their guard. His plan was to exploit his own vulnerability to approach the strongest vampire, and that was when the cute little bat would do its job. Carrot finally realized. This had been his goal from the very beginning. As the battle ended, Yuki introduced himself as Yuki, a monster tamer who fights using everything, enemies and allies alike. He sliced Karat cleanly in half. She called him a monster, her body shattered into countless gem fragments. Yuki calmly replied that he was human, a human who had formed a contract with the Demon King. Now that Yuki felt the dungeon's power, his eyes burned like they were on fire. He knew. He had already pushed himself far enough. Our boy then started absorbing the mana of the whole dungeon towards his marking, and after a few more moments, he was on the verge of collapse, so he entrusted everything to Lieber. Surprisingly, Saki arrived at that exact moment and caught him. She was stunned when she realized what had happened. Yuki had defeated Karat, alone. He was too anemic to even stand, so she supported him as best she could. Meanwhile, the media had gathered in front of a man who was about to make an announcement. He spoke about the A-rank dungeon. Because of a special incident, the parties involved would be required to report directly and explain the situation. Reporters fired off photos non-stop. This was guaranteed front-page news. They called out the name of the person who had contributed the most in the dungeon. The fake dungeon alone was already massive news, but a successful conquest on top of that made even a hardened middle-aged official admire the adventurer responsible. Saki was called to the front. The crowd lit up the moment they saw her. As expected, of the white flash. People adored her. One reporter asked about the dangers of a dungeon collapse. Another reporter asked whether an intelligent monster had appeared. She told them to quiet down before calmly explaining the outline of the conquest. Deep down, she felt it was a huge hassle, but Yuki had pushed the task onto her. The moment Yuki received the document outlining the report, he handed everything to her and disappeared. She suggested he stay until his treatment was finished, but he was already gone. It made her wonder what kind of business could possibly be that important. Meanwhile, Yuki rushed straight to Lieber's dungeon, and the moment he arrived, he asked how the resurrection was going. Mei was unleashing a terrifying surge of power as she answered that she was just finishing the final stage. Viento immediately told Yuki to stop watching. The mana alone could burn his eyes. Yuki could tell. Just standing there, he felt an overwhelming pressure bearing down on him. Mei called Elvina over and told her that break time was officially over. She warned her that staying in the netherworld forever was something she would never forgive. As she activated the approval of the afterlife, the chains of mana surrounding them began to move. After that, Elvina opened her eyes. Yuki finally relaxed when he saw her standing. She asked why he looked so relieved, and then she realized she must have died. Yuki told her the truth. She had come back to life. She already knew it was because of the headmaid's resurrection, but she had believed her death was meaningless, so the result surprised her. Yuki let out a deep sigh and said how glad he was that she was still so energetic. Since he had just said that to a zombie, she asked if that was supposed to be an undead joke. He immediately yelled that it wasn't. Viento cut into their banter and told them to get back to work at once. He ordered them to change clothes. Yuki sighed and asked if the job involved being a butler again. Elvina tilted her head and asked if he had ever worked as one. He denied it instantly. That was when Mei brought them their outfits. Yuki put on a suit that made him look polished, almost like a distinguished gentleman. He stared at himself, completely confused by the outfit. Viento revealed the reason. Today, Yuki was the star. The monsters in the room erupted in celebration. They were glad he had survived and excited to finally meet the rumored human. Some even said he had saved them. Yuki was completely baffled. Lieber explained that the dungeon Yuki conquered contained an enormous amount of magic power. Because of that, Mei was able to resurrect far more people than expected. And if she was being honest, she was exhausted. Yuki finally realized that everyone there had been resurrected. Lieber told him they were all curious about the human responsible, so he gathered them together. The monsters never expected to be saved by a human, and that realization filled them with joy. They invited Yuki to share drinks and tell his story. But Elvina immediately dragged him away. She declared she was first. She was confused too, especially since he apparently did something incredible. As he was dragged off, Yuki desperately called out to Lieber for help. Lieber only smiled and told him that because of the choice Yuki made back then, everyone here had been saved. He praised him and told him to get used to how they expressed their gratitude. But deep down, Yuki knew he hadn't done it for them. Elvina had simply overlapped with the girl from the orphanage. Still, watching the monsters interact, he was reminded of his days with the children at the orphanage, and that alone made him appreciate that he had been able to save them. A wolf monster suddenly brought up a rumor that Yuki was Viento's #1 disciple. Elvina shouted in shock without thinking. Viento calmly said he still needed to drill the basics into Yuki, the so-called star of the party. Lieber teased him, saying he must really like Yuki if he nagged that much. He even prepared clothes for him. Viento shot back that Lieber was the same. At first, he thought they were the ones using Yuki, but in reality, Yuki had used them. And he delivered results far beyond expectations. Lieber looked at Yuki with amusement. He claimed that Yuki was the key to obtaining the world. Meanwhile, Saki asked the reporter to repeat the question. A silver-haired man wearing sunglasses cut in and demanded they bring out the man already. He was referring to the real conqueror. He knew they were hiding someone dangerous, and he wanted Yuki for himself. Before this incident, a man was being intimidated in a narrow alleyway. Nearby, a dropped cell phone suddenly played news from a press conference announcing chaos. The man panicked and shouted that he didn't know anything. It was Gaido. His face was bruised as he yelled that it was Saki who brought that guy. The man wearing sunglasses under the night sky clicked his tongue. Another dead end. He complained that there were way too many low rankers, and it was getting sickening. Suddenly, Gaito remembered Yuki's name and blurted it out. The man with sunglasses paused. He remembered seeing a poster about Yuki. Gaito thought that would be enough to save him. After all, he had nothing to do with it anymore. But to the man, loose lips were dangerous. He told Gaito to blame his mouth, activated his skill, and put him down. The next day, Yuki walked through the city holding flowers. It had been a while since he was surrounded by nothing but humans. He was taking a break from dungeon training and raids. For today, he decided not to think about any of that. After all, this was the day he met everyone. He went to visit the monument, a great collapse memorial, built for the massive dungeon collapse that occurred years ago. It honored those who perished in the great collapse. He had many stories he wanted to tell them. Becoming an adventurer, clearing dungeons, learning swordsmanship. Then, someone caught his eye. A man in a red hoodie sat in the middle of the road. At first, Yuki thought it was Saki, but no, this man had been waiting for him. He was the sunglasses guy. His name was Zapper, an A-rank adventurer in the same line of work. Yuki asked if they had met before. Zapper replied that this was their first meeting. He said he came to scout him. Yuki was surprised and told him he was only E-rank, nowhere near impressive. Zapper brought up the fake dungeon raid. He told Yuki not to hide it. He already knew Yuki was involved. Yuki froze. He wondered how Zapper knew. If his monster powers were exposed, it would be bad. So he said Saki deserved the credit. He claimed he had only evacuated other adventurers, but Zapper knew that wasn't true. He said Yuki was the one who killed the boss. While the White Flash was busy dealing with the golem, he added that Yuki had the skills to handle an A-rank boss. That made Yuki wary. This man knew far too much. Yuki denied it, saying he only hid and ran away. Zapper didn't understand why Yuki was so desperate to hide it, but he told him to listen. Dungeon clearing wasn't like a normal job. Having a bunch of grunts didn't make a real squad. To earn real money, you needed excellent weapons. Top-tier ones. Yuki asked if Zapper was talking about him. Zapper explained that no matter how strong Yuki's job skills were, solo dungeon runs had limits. A party was different. Sure, his cut might shrink, but the number of places he could earn from would skyrocket. So, Zapper invited Yuki to make money together. Yuki thanked him for the offer, but he refused. His goal wasn't money. Zapper accepted the rejection. He admitted he wasn't exactly smooth talking, so it couldn't be helped. Still, he planned to test him anyway. So now, he wanted to fight. Yuki was shocked as Zapper unleashed Firehammer. The flames burned the flowers Yuki had brought. Yuki was stunned. Magic, right here in the city. Zapper was impressed that Yuki dodged it. That only made him want Yuki more. Yuki shouted at him to stop, especially since they were standing in a resting place for the dead. He remembered that using magic on the surface was illegal. But to Zapper, rejecting his offer was a far greater crime. He activated Stonebind, restraining Yuki and his skills. Zapper remarked that Yuki seemed experienced fighting monsters, but completely inexperienced in PvP. Yuki tried to use a skill, but Zapper grabbed his mouth to stop him. Then he activated Icebind, freezing Yuki's mouth shut. Zapper realized Yuki was nothing like him. In fact, he was his opposite, someone specialized in dungeon clearing. That was exactly why he wanted him. He shoved Yuki to the ground. He said he'd follow Yuki into every raid and do this to him again and again. He told Yuki to cry to the guild or call S-ranks if he wanted. But Zapper was known as the skill killer. Adventurers were no match for him. Yuki glared at him. Zapper left him there expecting an answer. And just like that, he disappeared in a trail of flame. Meanwhile, Liber was calmly playing chess when he sensed someone trying to poach his pawn, and it displeased him. Mei healed Yuki. Yuki planned to stay there for now in case Zapper tried to break in. He needed to come up with a countermeasure. Viento asked why he didn't have his sword. Yuki explained it was his day off, and carrying a weapon in the city would attract trouble. At his rank, questioning would be a nightmare. But even if he had his weapon, he admitted he would still lose. He had no idea how to deal with that magic. Liber reminded him of something important. He was a monster tamer. He suggested using them. Monsters were experts in magic. Then he called someone over. It was Machanami Tekua, an elf. She said she was in the middle of research. No one understood magic better than her. So Liber told Yuki to learn from the abyss, even though she clearly didn't want to. At Liber's dungeon on the Machinami Tamura floor, Machinami told Yuki that she had never gotten along with that old geezer. Yuki realized he had never once seen her at any tea parties or balls. That immediately annoyed her. She said she would never attend a party thrown by that antique bat. He was always nagging her about trying to look young or some nonsense when she was still in her early 30s. Yuki cautiously probed further. She clarified that it was around 1,000, give or take. A massive enough scale, if you asked her. Then she casually revealed that she was only 1,499 years old. She suddenly realized something amusing. If she made Viento's disciple stronger, that old geezer would absolutely hate it. Then her cute disciple would be so attached to her that Viento would turn green with envy, and eventually, some forbidden love that transcended the master-disciple bond would bloom. Yuki cut in and said he just wanted to learn magic. That alone was interesting enough for her to agree. After all, developing magic required simulation. She led him into the library. Yuki was stunned by its sheer size. He asked if all those books were about magic. She told him that wasn't even half of it. Most of her floors were made entirely of books. From the look on his face, she could tell he didn't even understand what magic really was. She teasingly called him Disciple Number 1 and asked if she was right. Then she asked him a simple question. How was magic any different from a skill? That made Yuki pause and reflect. She answered it herself. Skills were individual abilities. Magic, on the other hand, was a universal ability. Yuki had absolutely no idea what she meant, so she explained that skills were broadly categorized into 3 types. First, skills obtained through one's profession. Second, skills that each race naturally possessed. Finally, skills born from the sublimation of a fully mastered technique. Every single one of those was a cheat-like move, something only achievable through one's own body, technique, and talent. That was why imitation was impossible. Even if 2 skills looked identical, they were fundamentally different at their core. She tried jogging his memory by reminding him that he had already experienced this firsthand. Yuki remembered using the blood petal blade, so he replied that he understood perfectly, which meant magic must be the opposite. She smiled and told him he was right. No matter who used it, if the same magic was cast with the same mana and the same incantation, the result would always be identical. A universal law. An absolute law. That was magic. Yuki was starting to get excited. She then asked her second question. Why did so many people not use magic? Yuki guessed it might be because of strict requirements. Maybe it consumed massive amounts of mana. But the real answer was far simpler. It was just too difficult. He asked if it was because controlling mana was hard. She shook her head and told him even chanting was difficult. Proper magic required incantations as long as an entire book, even for basic spells. Yuki said he had never seen anyone chant for that long. Usually, skills only required something like call fire or similar. That led directly into her third question. She asked him if he knew how they were chanting. Yuki thought about it, then suggested they must be using something to assist them. That was the correct answer. Tools like staves could replace parts of the incantation. Magic circles could be carved. Some chants could be spoken internally, others partially omitted. Yuki realized it could be modified. She added that this was the beauty of magic. The more you learned, the more you could cheat. As an example, she casually said, call, fire hammer, and a blazing hammer formed in her hand. She explained incantation breach, the act of completing the incantation and visualization entirely within one's mind before speaking. It was a fundamental magic technique. However, the result varied depending on how deeply one understood the original incantation. Some replayed it as text, others as images, sounds, or combinations of all 3. It differed from person to person. Yuki finally understood why spells that sounded the same could still differ. Once he grasped it, she demonstrated the output. She invoked invasion, combined with firehammer. Yuki watched intently. She twisted the flames in her hands, explaining that it was possible to preserve only parts of the original incantation while bridging the gap with the complete version. Yuki finally understood what magic truly was, and he was thrilled. For now, he just needed to memorize the incantations. She agreed, but warned him that rote memorization was his limit. An incantation was essentially a command to magic. If he didn't know which sentence issued which instruction, he'd never modify spells or create new ones. Yuki realized it was just like learning a new language, and he wasn't even good at English. She laughed and reminded him that humans didn't have nearly as much time as she did, so he should be grateful. With that, she activated her magic and summoned the live-in library. Yuki could only stare. The space around him instantly transformed. She explained that the magic allowed one to experience the contents of a book directly. They were now inside the world of fire magic even a slime can understand, a book she personally wrote. If Yuki cleared this virtual dungeon, he would acquire its contents completely. Yuki liked that idea. And it played to his strengths. That was when she dropped a pile of other books on him. She told him to read all the major attributes and their basic variations. Yuki hesitated and asked if she meant clearing all of them. She smiled and said, "Of course," then challenged him not to call it impossible. A massive snake lunged at Yuki. He smirked and sliced it into several pieces. Seeing his reaction, Makinami's eyes lit up. Yuki confidently declared he'd finish everything in no time. 3 days later, inside the Makinami Takura floor of Lieber's dungeon, 2 tornadoes spun on either side as an eagle shot forward. It tore through the air at full speed, letting out a piercing screech. Yuki struggled to chant an incantation to interfere with the wind attribute. The environment itself was too violent. He was blown away, yet he kept chanting through clenched teeth. Machinami then casted Air Catch, and a massive hand of compressed air caught him just before he smashed into the ground. Machinami calmly commented that Disciple Number 1 truly had no talent. Lying flat on the ground, Yuki admitted that he finally understood why adventurers didn't chant spells in combat. In real battles, the opening was simply too big. She told him that magic was never originally meant for combat. It was meant to deceive the world and rewrite it however the user desired. Yuki listed the elements out loud. Fire, earth, water, ice, lightning. Every spell should have been powerful. He cast Stone Arrow. The projectile flew out, then flopped uselessly. His eyes widened as he complained about how ridiculous it was. He realized that incantation breaches lost far too much power. Just as Makinami said, once steps were skipped, individual differences became painfully obvious. A chant was a command sentence that rewrote the world through mana. When parts were omitted, the command itself became vague. She noticed his biggest flaw. He was terrible at filling in the gaps with imagination. No matter the element, once he used incantation breach, the output was nearly zero, and if he added more chanting to restore power, he would never keep up with Zapper. He wouldn't be able to react in time to Zapper's magic. Meanwhile, Zapper could always counter him with magic that had an elemental advantage. She told him that was something he'd encounter constantly. For example, Earth couldn't break through wind, and he hadn't even learned all the attributes yet. Still, she gave him hope. The next attribute, wind, might be his specialty. She had the air hand carry Yuki away. Yuki went back to training, hopeful that he'd finally find an element he was good at. But he couldn't help wondering, did Zapper even have a bad attribute? Meanwhile, several adventurers had set up camp deep in the mountains. Zapper was surprised when he learned that Yuki had entered an S-rank dungeon. One of his men reported that they searched everywhere, only to realize Yuki had gone straight into that dungeon. Zapper remembered it clearly, the one that forced even 2 S-rank parties to retreat. He found it amusing. It was a place ordinary adventurers couldn't even approach. They asked him what they should do. Zapper answered that it didn't matter, because they were going in too. The man panicked and refused. They hadn't finished clearing the monsters yet. More importantly, it was dangerous. Zapper agreed. It was dangerous. A massive mouth lined with razor-sharp teeth suddenly appeared above them, hanging in midair and dwarfing the 2 figures below. They were shocked. A giant worm had appeared. It lunged toward Zapper, ready to swallow him whole. Zapper didn't even flinch. He cast Water Lance, Ice Tusk, Stone Spear, Lightning Arrow, Storm Axe, Fire Hammer, multiple elements erupting at once and surging into the worm. He had killed too many again. He didn't expect much in terms of materials. The man beside him stood frozen in shock. Watching Zapper chant spells across all attributes, no matter how many times he saw it, it was still unbelievable. Now, he truly understood the power of an A-rank, top-class mage. Zapper said that S-rank dungeons were dangerous. That was exactly why they needed to catch up before Yuki went so deep that they couldn't touch him. The man pointed out the damage caused by the monster. Several members of their party had died. To Zapper, they were nothing more than replaceable B ranks, and if they ran out, he could always recruit more. The man protested, saying it was cruel, especially when Zapper could have saved them with magic. But Zapper refused to waste precious mana on people like that. He stomped his foot and declared that if he was going to use mana, it would be to capture Yuki, the special one. Meanwhile, Machinami called Disciple Number 1 with a bored expression. Yuki lay sprawled on the ground, looking like his soul had left his body. She told him bluntly that he had absolutely no talent for being special. He thought magic was supposed to be universal, but in the end, he couldn't perform incantation breach even once. It was the first time she'd ever seen someone fail so completely, even with partial chanting. If the major attributes were hopeless, then the minor ones offered even less promise, like insect. Yuki had gained knowledge, but he hadn't expected his talent to be this bad. All he could do now was work with what he had. She told him not to act like he understood magic. Yuki tried to say something. That was when she revealed the truth. His training hadn't even reached the first stage yet. They hadn't even started warming up. She cheerfully declared that magic existed so anyone could rewrite the world, to crush dissatisfaction, injustice, even common sense itself. That was why she would never allow words like compromise or giving up. Yuki asked how he was supposed to do that. She said it was simple. He had already seen her do something similar against that old man. All he had to do was create a brand new magic that only he could use. Machinami suggested that Yuki apply that theory directly to magic. What he had learned so far was more than enough. At his current level, he could already teach beginners. Yuki was stunned by the realization. Even if he was bad at using existing spells, he could simply create one he was good at. That was exactly what Machinami meant. Instead of relying on long incantations, he would manipulate mana directly through emotion to reshape the world, then add incantations later, if needed. For combat magic, practice was everything. From now on, he would train under her directly. As she spoke, she suddenly snapped her head to the side, making Yuki ask what was wrong. She activated Aqua Vision and saw Zapper unleashing a fire wave on the dungeon's first floor. Zapper was searching for Yuki. To widen the search, he activated Wind Search. Machinami showed Yuki the scene through a floating water sphere. Yuki was shocked. Zapper was already here. It looked like Zapper had followed him. To Machinami, this was the perfect opportunity. She wanted Yuki to deal with him using magic only, no summoning. With that, she activated Shrine Drive. It was the same spell that had teleported Yuki and his party when he first entered the dungeon. Now he understood. It was teleportation magic. Yuki wondered if Lieber had chosen the Machinami Takura floor specifically because she could control something like this. Zapper was teleported into the same area. The moment Zapper saw Yuki, he assumed Yuki had been hiding his true strength. He demanded an answer. Yuki was caught off guard. Zapper attacked immediately with an Aqua Javelin. Yuki dodged and unsheathed his sword. Zapper said there was no need for explanations. He could already see the truth written on Yuki's angry face. He tried to trap Yuki with Stone Jail. Yuki sliced straight through the stone. Zapper remarked that Yuki had the makings of a swordsman. He also noticed that Yuki didn't flinch at all when the spell appeared. But Zapper activated Mudbind. Yuki was shocked. Zapper skipped the process of generating mud by combining water and earth. It was far faster than chanting. Yuki began his own incantation. Zapper laughed. Trying to stop his magic was pointless. He was faster. He unleashed Wind Hammer. Yuki took the hit head-on. Zapper realized Yuki was still relying on incantations, but his magic skills weren't there yet. Yuki knew he couldn't win an incantation battle. So he decided to create a new spell. From Yuki's eyes alone, Zapper could tell. He was plotting something. Magic was a miracle. It was the act of rewriting the world when mana responded to a person's will. That was why chanting and explanations existed. When a caster fully understood the principle, they could remove waste, and eventually, chanting itself. Yuki felt alarm bells ringing. As he closed the distance, he wore a chilling smile. Zapper realized too late. Yuki was planning a lightning attack. Yuki was blasted away. He understood something clearly now. There were forms of magic he wasn't good at, because miracles had never answered him. No matter how much he prayed, everyone disappeared. Not a single one came back. A massive force surged toward him, warping the air. Yuki braced himself as the enemy charged straight in. The attack detonated. Stone pillars shattered, debris scattering everywhere. Zapper was certain he had landed the finishing blow. His eyes widened. There was no one there. Yuki believed miracles didn't exist. There was no such thing as that kind of magic. He admitted it himself. He didn't understand magic at all. Suddenly, he heard Machinami calling his name. Confused, he asked where her voice was coming from. She told him plainly. It was magic. Her magic. Yuki said he was struggling. She offered advice. She told him that in terms of knowledge, he was already a first-class mage. That meant he could alter anything. What he lacked was deciding what magic he wanted. She explained that whenever she used magic, her thought was simple. Wouldn't it be fun if magic like this existed? He needed to pour that emotion directly into the mana. Yuki knew his emotions well, and the emotion he felt toward magic was rage. The moment he accepted that, the pillar he was hiding behind exploded. The battlefield descended into chaos, in this unfair world. The angrier you were, the stronger you became. Zapper found him again and realized Yuki had no intention of giving up. Yuki faced him head-on and extended his hand. He was going to use no incantation magic. Zapper mirrored his stance. Zapper summoned a firestorm, confident that no magic could overpower his own. The flames brushed against Yuki's arm. Zapper thought he had him. Then, Yuki spoke. Yuki demonstrated a path completely opposite of his teachers. There were no lessons for this. But Machinami thought it was beautiful magic. Yuki had created a void shield. Yuki decided to teach Zapper a new kind of magic, a magic that rejected all magic. That was his magic. Yuki deployed a void shield. It denied all magic. He was determined not to let Zapper use magic. Not even once. Zapper couldn't understand why his spells were being cancelled so suddenly. One moment they responded, then it was like the world itself ignored him. Now, he abandoned the idea of dragging Yuki into his party. That thought was gone. Instead, he decided he'd just kill him right there. He threw out a lightning javelin. Yuki parried it. Next came the aqua whip. It slammed into the shield, and cracks spread across it. Yuki immediately realized it. His defense was reaching its limit. Meanwhile, Zapper noticed something strange. Terrifying, even. The shield wasn't blocking a single element. It was nullifying all attributes. And he felt it, an eerie sensation that made him realize the magic itself was being interfered with, as if the will meant to guide mana was being rejected. Machinami watched from her floating broom. She saw that Zapper had already realized it. She acknowledged it silently. He was reasonably skilled. Original magic conveys will to mana to alter the world. Void was the opposite. Through the mana inside the body, it commanded the outside mana not to change. If she had to name it, she would call it the Void attribute, magic created solely by disciple number 1, born from his hatred toward magic itself. Zapper knew that if the magical alteration exceeded a certain level, he might break through it by sheer volume alone. So he unleashed several elements at once. Yuki agreed. If he only defended, it would be impossible to win. So he combined it and formed a Void Saber, and then he slashed straight through it. Zapper was flabbergasted. Yuki destroyed only the most dangerous parts. He erased the attack with minimal consumption. Machinami felt proud. Yuki could only use one attribute, yet his understanding was first class. Though, she still hated the old man's swordsmanship. With that skill, Yuki was confident he could reach Zapper. Zapper frantically erected an ice wall and a wind wall, but Yuki erased the wind, and for the ice, he simply slashed it apart. Zapper was in trouble. His magic barely worked, and physical reinforcement was blocked by the sword. He called forth a fire wave. In an instant, Yuki raised his void shield again to defend himself. Zapper began to worry. At this rate, his mana would run out first. He desperately thought about what spell could work, what could break through, and that's when Yuki found an opening. He unleashed his blood petal blade in his own style. Zapper's eyes widened. He knew immediately. His defense wouldn't hold. Yuki pressed the attack. Zapper resisted and cast wind magic. It was an air hammer, and it left Yuki momentarily stunned. He never expected Zapper to cast it on himself, just to dodge. It couldn't be helped. Zapper decided to let him off this time, but he warned him there would be no next time. He said he'd find a way to defeat that magic. Then he called Windwing and flew away. Yuki was stunned by how calmly he retreated, but he understood. If Zapper stayed, he wouldn't survive as an adventurer. Makanami screamed in his ear, furious that he let him escape. If Zapper got away, that old geezer would definitely mock them. She could already imagine his smug face. Yuki admitted he had a move reserved for emergencies. He looked down at the binding in his hand and asked if he could remove it. Then he gripped his sword. Meanwhile, while fleeing, Zapper complained about how awful he felt and planned what to do once he returned. But mid-flight, he sensed something. Mana. Yuki unleashed a full chant. An ominous energy flooded the entire area. Zapper couldn't believe it. A full chant required an enormous amount of time. There was no way Yuki could fire one off that fast. Yet, no matter how he looked at it, the mana was coming from Yuki's position. He immediately created distance and cast Wind Boost. Makanami wondered what he was planning, especially since he went as far as using summoning. May appeared and invoked the Mother of Chaos, where all are born, and all must return. She calmly began her incantation. Yuki and Makanami watched as power swirled violently around her. Yuki explained that just in case the new magic wasn't ready in time, he had taught May the spell via telepathy beforehand, and made her chant it. Magic was versatile. Anyone could use it if they completed a full chant. May finished the chant and casually commented that Yuki was rough with his maids. Yuki thought like a true monster tamer. He made his comrades do what he couldn't. May was undead, so exhaustion didn't matter. She released a dark arrow. Zapper panicked. He had no choice but to deflect it, so he cast a holy shield. It was pierced through the upper left side and cracked instantly. The cracks rapidly spread. Then, he noticed something about the arrow. It was a void arrow. Just as Yuki promised, magic would never happen for him again. Zapper was flung backward as a massive wave of purple energy surged upward. The violent swirl swallowed everything, forcing a scream from him. As he was consumed by it, he hurled curses at Yuki. Machinami admired the outcome. The power and precision were perfect. She praised Yuki. He was good at teaching magic. Yuki smiled and replied that it was because he had a good master. Only Zapper's sunglasses remained. Meanwhile, at the Liber dungeon surface entrance, several armed men in white, assassin-like uniforms took position. Their captain was still clearing another dungeon elsewhere. They believed they could suppress the situation themselves. The only one they feared was Zapper. The enforcement squad moved in to capture both Zapper and Yuki. Few minutes later, Yuki exited the dungeon with Zapper slung over his back. Moving through a dungeon while carrying another person alone was exhausting, and it showed. He planned to hand Zapper over to the guild. But before he could take more than a few steps, armed men stopped him. They pointed their weapons at him, clearly intending to take him into custody immediately. Seeing their all-white uniforms, Yuki recognized them at once. The guild's public order specialist combat group, the Execution Squad. He thought the timing was perfect since he was about to hand Zapper over anyway, but the moment he stepped forward, ice blocked his path. A short-haired woman in a white uniform ordered him to stop. She was Nanao, a B-rank mage from the Execution Squad. Yuki couldn't understand why he was being treated like a criminal too. Dugo, an A-rank monk from the Execution Squad, explained that multiple reports had been filed against Yuki by other adventurers. They believed Yuki was Zapper's party member, and in the name of maintaining public order, the Execution Squad intended to detain both of them. Yuki tried to explain that he was the victim. Suddenly, Zapper activated Fireburst. The Execution Squad instinctively pulled back, momentarily distracted by the flames. Yuki reacted instantly, forming a void saber to defend himself. Zapper laughed and muttered that thanks to Yuki, he'd woken up in the best possible situation. He bolted, and the Execution Squad immediately gave chase. They launched ice lances, reverse slashes, and even the demonic axe Gulveg. Zapper defended himself by erecting layers of ice. Meanwhile, Yuki was intercepted by another Execution Squad member. The situation was rapidly spiraling out of control. Yuki tried to shout that this wasn't the time to fight. Surrounded, Zapper released a thunderburst, electrocuting everyone nearby. They collapsed one after another. He kicked one of the fallen members toward a still-conscious ally. That man took the hit directly. He immediately healed his comrade using the skill unscathed reward. While they were distracted, Zapper warned them not to take another step forward. Zapper grabbed Nanao and took her hostage. He declared that he wasn't the same as before, and that they should understand the difference. At that distance, Yuki's shield wouldn't reach in time, and he couldn't cancel the spell fast enough with arrows or swords. Dugo clicked his tongue in annoyance. Tired of the cowardly tactics, he decided to handle it himself. He ordered 2 guards to keep their eyes fixed on Yuki. Yuki couldn't attack recklessly with a hostage involved. If the Execution Squad coordinated properly, there was still a chance, but Zapper sneered that it would be easier to just cut everyone down. Protecting people was such a hassle. Seeing the number and complexity of the magic circles forming, Yuki knew it was large-scale magic. At that rate, he wouldn't be able to protect everyone. He told them to hide behind the shadow of his magic, but suddenly, a silver-haired woman appeared and calmly told them there was no need. She activated her skill, Eye of Fair Play, then asked Zapper if that was really all the mana he had left. Yuki recognized her immediately. She was the Execution Squad's captain, and an S-rank adventurer. Known as the guild's living rulebook, Ina Ginki, an S-rank paladin. She activated her skill, Sparrow Bee Dragon. Zapper was struck instantly and lost his grip on Nanao. It was a terrifying technique, one that produced the result of a hit before the attack itself. She calmly scolded him for pouring all his mana into offense. Zapper hadn't expected Ginki to appear. Panicking, he cast Stonebind. Ginki told Yuki to use his magic. He was shocked that she even knew about it. But there was no time to dwell on that. Yuki summoned his Void Saber. Zapper hurriedly layered multiple elemental barriers. He unleashed Ramaitaki Arrow Rain, covering the sky in countless arrows. Ginki immediately realized his intent. He was targeting every member of her squad. She activated Scatter Arrow Divert, a skill that alters an object's target. The arrow's destination was swapped, with Yuki. Yuki instantly raised his void shield as arrows poured down on him. Ginki knew he would block it. Still, she found herself curious about him. Then she appeared behind Zapper. She swung her weapon and activated Great Neganata Iwatushi. Zapper took the hit head-on. It was checkmate. The squad rushed in to secure him. Ginki remarked that he had far less mana than she expected. It suggested he'd just come from an intense battle. Afterward, she thanked Yuki for his cooperation. Thanks to his magic, the situation had been resolved swiftly. Yuki asked how she knew about his magic. She explained that Eye of Fair Play allowed her to peek at people's statuses. She said it resembled his Demon Eye of Truth. Now it made sense, how she knew both his ability and Zapper's remaining mana. Dugo reported that Zapper had been fully restrained and the injured treated. Then he turned to Yuki. Ginki stated that the suspicion surrounding Yuki had been cleared. He had even assisted with the capture. Dugo added that the accusations against Yuki were most likely a misunderstanding. Since everything hadn't been fully clarified, he couldn't formally apologize. But Yuki would be removed from the list of detainees. He thanked him for his cooperation and protection. Yuki said it was fine, as long as the misunderstanding was resolved. He also offered to help with Zapper's investigation if needed. However, Dugo raised another issue. The dungeon Yuki had emerged from was S rank. Solo entry was prohibited. Yuki was left speechless. Dungeon challenges required guild approval. While Yuki had previously entered with a party, after an evaluation, solo diving was a clear violation. Ginki said Yuki's ability wasn't the problem. Dugo countered that this was merely her subjective opinion. Officially, Yuki was still E rank. Ginki proposed a solution. Yuki would conquer the dungeon they were currently managing. Dugo would accompany him as supervisor. If they judged his ability sufficient, no investigation or detention would be necessary. Yuki asked if such special treatment was really acceptable. Ginki replied that for humanity, stagnation in dungeon conquest was the greatest sin of all. That was why she became captain. To push through decisions like this, She said she was looking forward to this monster tamer's conquest. Yuki hesitated at the thought of showing his methods to others. Then, we see Lieber suggested he proceed as usual. He warned that the execution squad would supervise closely and that bringing monsters capable of conversation could result in his adventurer status being revoked. However, if he brought the bat, it would cause anemia. And Lieber doubted he could clear the dungeon with only that. Lieber suggested he go ask Task instead. Yuki remembered serving him before and asked if Task was a specialist like Machinami. Lieber replied that Task was far more than that, because Task was the master of his dungeon.